Hi everyone, welcome back. This is video 2 for this week, and we're talking about conspiracy theories. So, what is a theory? If we want to talk about conspiracy theories, we got to talk about theories. So, when we see a bunch of facts, we often want an explanation for those facts. Right? We want to know why this is the case. We do that from when we're little kids, where small children will ask why indefinitely until you want to hit your head against the wall. And, adults also want to know why, ask for explanations, try to find out why. That's what most academic research is. And that's what a lot of businesses invest a lot of money in, is finding out why customers respond to this and not to this, why clients want this, why this happened, etc. You want to know why. And when we ask why, we're looking for an explanation. And we want to know why one candidate won the election and another lost, for example. You look for an explanation of some kind. And the explanation is a theory. It's a theory to explain why some fact or set of facts occurred or are true. It's trying to explain the facts. So, for example, Einstein's theory of general relativity is a theory that tries to explain the effects of gravity and the various facts we know about space and the movements of stars and planets. We have all this data, both astronomical data and sort of more mundane physics data. And Einstein's general relativity is a theory that tries to explain all of that data. Why stars and planets move the way they do, why objects fall at a certain rate in, one planet's gravity, and a different rate in another planet's gravity. All kinds of data at sort of the medium scale that we live at and at the larger sort of astronomical scale. Evolution is a theory that tries to explain all the different kinds of organisms that exist and the similarities and differences between them, as well as the fossils of organisms that exist in the past and the similarities and differences and the different kinds of organisms that appear at different times in the fossil record. Evolution is a theory that tries to explain all of that data, all of those facts about all of those biological facts. Einstein's general relativity is a physics theory that tries to explain a bunch of physics facts. And these are theories that are trying to make explanations for data that we see, that we already accept. And these theories explain that data by making claims. In order to explain some facts, you need to make claims about what the world is like. The theory of evolution claims that random genetic mutations occur in organisms and that these mutations are passed down to descendants, and that organisms with more useful traits resulting from those mutations will survive and reproduce more than organisms with less useful traits, and thus organisms will change over time and become more and more well adapted to their environment. Those are a bunch of claims that the theory of evolution makes. If the theory of evolution is true, then all those claims that it makes are true. The theory of general relativity claims that the speed of light is constant, that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, and that space-time itself can be curved, and there are very specific mathematical formulas governing the curvature of space-time and yada yada. That space and time can be relative. Whether two things are simultaneous depends on your frame of reference. Those are all claims that the theory of general relativity makes. And if the theory of general relativity is true, then all of those claims that it makes must also be true. So theories try to explain some facts that we already accept and recognize. And it does so by making claims that we may not already accept, that we may not already recognize. So the theory tries to explain some facts about the world by making some other claims about the world. And some theories are true, right? They really do explain the facts they're supposed to explain, and the claims that the theory makes are true claims. Some theories are false. They make claims that aren't true. The claims the theory makes are false claims. The world's not actually anything like the way the theory says it is. And some theories are just bad. I don't have a better word for it than bad, but some theories, look, even if the claims made by the theory were true, they still wouldn't actually explain the facts that they're supposed to explain. And that's a bad theory, regardless of whether or not the claims it makes are true. If you want to explain, evolution or the effects that evolution is supposed to explain, and instead of appealing to evolution and genetic mutations, you just say, well, because organisms don't want to die. That's it. That's a bad explanation. Even if it's true that organisms don't want to die, that does not explain the full fossil record and the variety of organisms that we see. You need a better explanation than that. It's true that organisms don't want to die, but that by itself does not explain anything or does not explain everything. And so it's not a good theory. You need a better, broader theory that makes more claims and can explain more of the data. So we've talked about what theories are. They try to explain some set of facts by making some other claims about the world. So what is a conspiracy theory? Well, a conspiracy theory is a theory that appeals to a conspiracy. So a conspiracy is a plan or a course of action taken in secret by a small group of individuals working towards some shared goal. That's what a conspiracy is. So a conspiracy can be sinister. There was a conspiracy to assassinate Abraham Lincoln, for example. John Wilkes Booth and a small group of friends and co-conspirators met in secret to plot the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. They met, they planned, they figured it out. They tried to plan his kidnapping first, and then they gave up and decided to just kill him. That was a conspiracy. If you want to explain Lincoln's death at a relatively young age, the correct explanation is that this conspiracy existed and succeeded. That's how you explain the fact that Abraham Lincoln died at the age he died at. And so that's a sinister conspiracy. We think of conspiracies as being sinister a lot of time. It sounds bad. But strictly speaking, conspiracies don't have to be sinister. There can be benevolent conspiracies or good conspiracies. The African National Congress, for example, met in secret for years to plan how to end apartheid in South Africa. And that's good. Apartheid was terrible, and it needed to end. And plotting to end apartheid is a really good thing to do. But it was still a small group of individuals meeting in secret to plan a course of action. So it was technically a conspiracy. So if you want to know how apartheid in South Africa ended, the explanation has to, at least in part, appeal to this, technically, this conspiracy. But it's not a bad conspiracy. It's a very good conspiracy. So there can be good conspiracies and there can be bad conspiracies. And a conspiracy theory is just any theory that tries to explain some facts by appealing to a conspiracy, by appealing to a small group of individuals working in secret to plan and execute a course of action. It's an attempted explanation of some facts in terms of actions undertaken by a small group working in secret. So here are some examples of conspiracy theories. 9/11 was an inside job. That's a conspiracy theory. It says that 9/11 occurred, and the correct explanation for that event is a conspiracy in the US government to orchestrate this attack on the World Trade Center and on the Pentagon for mysterious and sinister motives. The moon landing was fake is another conspiracy theory. It tries to explain all of the video evidence we have of people walking on the moon and all of these other effects. Buzz Aldrin's talking about having been on the moon, etc. It tries to explain all of that tries to explain it away by appealing to this conspiracy where NASA and maybe Stanley Kubrick worked together to fake the moon landing and to explain all of this. You appeal to this conspiracy of them trying to fake the moon landing so that they can pretend to win the space race against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Another conspiracy theory is QAnon, which is a conspiracy theory that is a thing now that says that Democrats and Hollywood celebrities and other people are involved in a pedophile child trafficking cult that worships the devil and is plotting against Donald Trump for purposes of some kind. That's a conspiracy theory. It says everything that's happening now in the news, everything, that Donald Trump was doing as president, everything that, Hillary Clinton was doing as a candidate, and after that, that is all explained by this secret group of people working together for their satanic child trafficking cult, trying to drink the blood of children to stay young forever or something. That's a conspiracy theory. It tries to explain current events in the news by appealing to this secret shadowy cabal of satanic child traffickers. That's a conspiracy theory. Other conspiracy theories that you may have heard in the news recently include the conspiracy that the wildfires in California were caused by a space laser owned by the Rothschilds, which is a banking family in Europe. That's a conspiracy. It tries to explain this fact that there are wildfires in California, and tries to explain it by appealing to a small group of people, this one family, having a space laser that they used to start these fires for some nefarious purposes or other. I'm a little unclear on the motives that theory is advocating that these people have. But those are some conspiracy theories that some of which you may have heard before, some of which you may not have. Those are some conspiracy theories. Now, many conspiracy theories are false, right? A lot of conspiracy theories are not true. But some conspiracy theories are true. MK Ultra, for example, was a conspiracy theory that the CIA was secretly dosing people with LSD without their knowledge or consent in order to try to develop mind control drugs that they could use to win the Cold War. That turned out to be true. That really did happen. The CIA really did secretly dose people with LSD without their knowledge or consent, including its own employees, including people in a small town in France, which resulted in death and destruction. They tried, psychologically torturing people to get better interrogation techniques that would sort of force people to tell them the truth and whatnot. A lot of weird stuff, a lot of creepy stuff. That all turned out to be true. Watergate, also a conspiracy theory. A group of people working for Richard Nixon really did break into the Watergate Hotel to steal information about the Democratic campaign. That was a conspiracy theory that tried to explain this break-in in a hotel. It tried to explain it in terms of a conspiracy in the Nixon campaign and a cover-up after the fact. And that turned out to be true. There really was this conspiracy in the Nixon campaign, the small group of people working together to steal information from their opponent's campaign. And that conspiracy really does explain why this break-in occurred and how it occurred. So the Watergate conspiracy theory turned out to be true. Another 9/11 was an inside job is a false conspiracy theory, but that 9/11 was perpetrated by Al-Qaeda is a true conspiracy theory. It says a small group of people worked in secret to plot and execute the attacks, and that is what happened. That small group of people worked in secret. They plotted and executed the attacks. That small group was in Al-Qaeda rather than in the US government, but still that is technically a conspiracy. And so that conspiracy theory that tries to explain the attacks by appealing to this Al-Qaeda conspiracy is true. So some conspiracy theories are true. And so believing a conspiracy theory is not inherently irrational, and they're not by definition false. The fact that something is technically a conspiracy theory does not guarantee that it is false or that believing it is irrational. But a lot of conspiracy theories are false, and believing in them is irrational. So when should we believe a conspiracy theory? When should we not believe a conspiracy theory? When is it reasonable to believe that there is a conspiracy going on? Well, one way to answer this question is to look at what makes a good theory. Why is general relativity a good theory and the Illuminati controlling the stars and planets with a secret computer not a good theory to explain why stars and planets move in the ways they do? One of those is a good theory, one of those is a bad theory. Both seek to explain the astronomical data that we have. Well, when evaluating a theory, we should look at the evidence for the claims made in the theory. Does the theory have good evidence to support it? One piece of evidence that supports the MKUltra conspiracy theory, that a small group working in the CIA was dosing people with LSD to try to develop mind control drugs and better interrogation techniques. One piece of evidence that supports that conspiracy theory is the long list of declassified CIA documents that detail the conspiracy and the planning and operation of the MKUltra project in the CIA. Decades after it ended, the documents became declassified, and we found out that it was, in fact, really happening, or had been happening. It was true. That's a strong piece of evidence. A bunch of internal memos detailing the conspiracy is good evidence that there was such a conspiracy. Several members of the Watergate conspiracy admitted to participating in the conspiracy while they were under oath in court or being interrogated by the FBI. That's also good evidence that the alleged conspiracy existed. If a bunch of people come forward and admit that there was a conspiracy and that they were part of it, that is good evidence that the conspiracy existed. Now, maybe they're lying, but it's without evidence that they're lying, it is good evidence that there is a conspiracy. So conspiracy theories claim that some conspiracy exists. And what we can learn from the MKUltra and Watergate cases is that a strong piece of evidence for a conspiracy theory is participants of the conspiracy leaking information about the conspiracy's activities. When that happens, then you've got some evidence to support it. You know, we know that the Watergate conspiracy is true because people in the Watergate conspiracy said it was true and told us about it and detailed it and gave us details about it. Now, some defenders of conspiracy theories will say that a successful conspiracy won't have leaks. And so the absence of leaks, the fact that no one leaked information is what we should expect. And so demanding this kind of evidence before we believe it is unreasonable. But the bigger the conspiracy, the less likely it is that its activities stay secret. If the conspiracy involves thousands of people working in secret, and not a single one of them ever comes forward for decades to admit that they were part of a conspiracy, and you try really hard to find evidence, find someone who will admit to it, then the absence of evidence starts to look like evidence of absence, to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, of all people. The fact that you can't find this piece of evidence, even though if there are thousands of people, we really should expect to have that piece of evidence that the conspiracy is real, then the lack of leaks is suspicious, and we should think maybe the conspiracy is not really real, or probably, or almost definitely even, the conspiracy is not really real. The bigger the conspiracy, the less likely it is that its activities stay secret. And to quote the reading for today, it's hard to get people to work together on long-term complex projects, much less in secret. And if you don't know this already, you will know it when you start working at, whatever your career is going to be. Eventually, you run into the situation where you're trying to get people to work together on a long-term complex project, and it is hard. It is really hard. And most conspiracy theories require that the conspiracy be really big, be done perfectly, executed flawlessly with no mess ups, and totally in secret with no leaks and no one admitting to it ever. And that's a hell of a tall order. That is really, really hard. That is borderline impossible. And so if the conspiracy theory that you're looking at requires that a mass conspiracy have zero leaks and go off perfectly with no flaws, you should really be skeptical. That's almost definitely not going to happen. If the alleged conspiracy is big enough and goes on long enough, then the absence of any leaks can be evidence that there was no conspiracy. Because if the conspiracy were real, given that many people and it going on for that long, someone would have come forward by now. Because that's just how it works. Every conspiracy theory that actually happened that we know of had leakers and had people who came forward and admitted it. And so if no one does, that might be evidence that there is no such conspiracy. But in addition to looking at what evidence we have for the claims, whether or not anyone came forward and admitted to being in the conspiracy, or whether or not, other claims the theory makes, whether it's a conspiracy theory or another theory, whether or not the claims it makes have evidence to support them, we should also, besides that, just be checking, well, how does the theory compare to its rival theories? How does this explanation compare to alternative explanations? Is it a simpler theory? Does it provide a more thorough explanation? Does it require us to believe fewer unreasonable things or fewer surprising claims? Conspiracy theories often try to explain data that the official story doesn't explain. The JFK was really assassinated not by Lee Harvey Oswald, but by two gunmen on the grassy knoll hired by LBJ or whatever. That's a conspiracy theory that tries to explain some sort of vague discrepancies in the official story about where the bullet went and how it traveled and things like that. Other conspiracy theories try to explain data that the official story doesn't even attempt to explain or doesn't give a very clear explanation of. That's 9/11 was an inside job. People will talk about how jet fuel can't melt steel beams or whatever. They'll say, look, 9/11 being an inside job provides a better explanation for how these steel beams melted than the plane crashing into 9/11. It was all Al-Qaeda the whole time theory does. And that is often a tool used by conspiracy theorists to try to defend their theory and say that their theory is better than whatever the official story is. Because they'll say, look, the official story doesn't provide a good explanation for this piece of data here. Our theory provides a full, detailed explanation for that piece of data. So our theory is better. It better explains the data. But conspiracy theories usually can't explain everything, and so they aren't actually more thorough. They don't provide more thorough explanations. For example, 9/11 was an inside job conspiracy theory doesn't have a really good explanation for why Osama bin Laden took credit for the attack on video. That's a pretty substantial piece of data. The 9/11 was perpetrated by Al-Qaeda theory has a real good explanation for that. 9/11 was an inside job theory does not have a good explanation for that at all. So, regardless of the whatever steel beam melting temperatures thing going on, the 9/11 was an inside job conspiracy theory doesn't actually explain more data or provide a better explanation of the data once you look at all the data. Similarly, the NASA faked the moon landing conspiracy theory doesn't explain why the Soviet Union didn't expose the lie. The whole motive behind NASA allegedly faking the moon landing is that they didn't have the technology to get to the moon, but they did want to win the space race in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. So they faked the moon landing so that they could win the space race. But the Soviet Union did have the technology at the time to tell whether or not the video feed was coming from the moon or coming from America. And so they could have exposed the lie. So for this conspiracy theory to work, the Soviet Union has to have some reason not to expose the lie and has to have some reason to pretend to lose the space race during the Cold War. And there's just no good explanation for that. The NASA fake the moon landing conspiracy theory does not provide a good explanation for that. So it tries to provide a better explanation for like why you can't see stars in the video and why there was enough dust around the spaceship landing thing that you can see footprints. But the official story has an explanation for that too, and also has an explanation for why the Soviet Union didn't expose the lie. Simple. There wasn't a lie to expose. So the NASA fake the moon landing conspiracy theory tries to say that it provides a more thorough explanation because it provides simpler and clearer and better explanations for a bunch of data about the moon landing videos. But when you look at all the data as a whole, including the Soviet Union accepting that the US went to the moon publicly, when you look at all the data, it doesn't actually provide a more thorough explanation. It provides a less thorough explanation. It's a worse explanation overall. And so we should compare theories to each other and see how they explain all of the data that they need to explain. Not just little bits and pieces that we sort of cherry pick to support the theory we already like, but all of the data that we need the theory to explain. So we want to look at whether or not the conspiracy theory is more thorough than alternatives, whether or not any theory is more thorough, provides a better explanation of the data than alternatives. But we also want to look at whether or not it's simpler, because it's often seen as a good feature for a theory to have that the theory is simple or simpler than its rivals. Occam's razor, which you may have heard of and be familiar with, is basically given two theories that fit the data equally well, go with the simpler theory. You know, if one theory says, you know, the Earth moves around the sun because of gravity, and the other theory says the Earth moves around the sun because of gravity, and also a conspiracy by the Illuminati to keep days and nights unequal for most of the planet or whatever. Both theories appeal to gravity, but only this one ends the explanation there. This requires that we believe in gravity and also believe in a conspiracy. And so this is not a simpler theory. So we want simpler theories, more elegant solutions. People do that in science all the time. Einstein thought that relativity had to be right in part because it was such a clear, simple, elegant theory. It was a sign it must be on to something good. And he was right. Simple theories, especially in science, are often taken to be better and more reliable theories. You shouldn't appeal to more stuff than you have to. You shouldn't posit unnecessary entities or forces to explain the data if you don't have to. That's sort of the idea behind Occam's razor. We want a simpler theory. And conspiracy theories are often simpler or seem simpler because they appeal to one cause: the conspirators working in secret towards their goal. That is the explanation for everything. The conspiracy theory that the California wildfires were started by a space laser owned by a European banking family, that explains the wildfires with one cause: space laser. Done. Don't need to appeal to anything else. You don't, whereas the non-conspiracy theory explanation for the California wildfires has to appeal to complex changes in the climate and local changes in land management and forestry and recent weather patterns and all kinds of different data from different complex sources to paint a complete picture for why these wildfires occurred when they did, were as bad as they did, happened where they did, etc. Whereas the Jewish space laser conspiracy, this is it's sometimes referred to as the Jewish space laser conspiracy because the Rothschilds are a Jewish family and they have historically been the target of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which this one seems to be also kind of vaguely anti-Semitic. So this space laser conspiracy theory only appeals to one cause. So these people wanted a fire in California, so they hit it with a laser that would start a fire. That's it. Seems simpler, right? It's simple, only appeals to one cause, and oftentimes the theory is appealing precisely because it offers such a simple explanation, or seems to offer such a simple explanation. But conspiracy theories often only seem simpler. They don't actually simplify the story. They're actually adding new causes to the story. So they're really complicating it. So for example, NASA faking the moon landing seems simple because recording a video in a studio in California or whatever is easier to achieve than actually getting to the moon. Any idiot can record a video on Earth, but it takes a lot of resources and hard math and physics to get people off planet onto the moon. But when you add in the fact that the Soviet Union would have had to play along despite the Cold War and the space race, giving them very strong incentives not to, and when you take into account the number of people who would have had to have been involved back then and the number of people who would have had to keep it a secret their entire lives up through now, over 50 years, the story gets a lot more complicated and requires that a huge conspiracy go off perfectly for decades. And after a certain point, it's just a more complicated theory that requires you to believe a lot more questionable stuff than the official story, which is that, hey, the same people who were able to build rockets for missiles and atomic bombs also were able to build big rockets to go to space. That's, at the end of the day, that's a simpler theory. That's a simpler explanation that actually requires you to appeal to fewer causes and fewer conspiracies and fewer groups of people pulling off this huge leak-free conspiracy for decades. That ends up being a much more complicated explanation, the conspiracy explanation. It's way more complicated than the official story, which is, yeah, we did some math and just threw jet fuel or rocket fuel at it until they got to space. That's simpler. That's just a simpler theory at the end of the day. Or another conspiracy theory is the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, which said that there was a pizza place in DC. This was, I think, a conspiracy theory based on the leaked Hillary Clinton emails into 2016. The conspiracy theory said that there was a pizza shop in Washington, D.C. that was the base for a child trafficking ring's secret activities. And so the conspiracy theory says that kids are at this pizza shop, or some kids are at this pizza shop because they're being trafficked, and others aren't. They're just there because it is still a functioning pizza shop, so others are just there for pizza. So some kids are there for pizza. Some kids are there because they're being trafficked. And the conspiracy explanation therefore appeals to two causes: kids liking pizza and a child trafficking conspiracy. So the data of there are all these kids around this pizza shop is explained by two causes in the conspiracy theory. But in the non-conspiracy theory explanation, there's just one cause you got to appeal to. Kids like pizza. That's why there are kids at a pizza place. And that's actually a much simpler explanation. And so the conspiracy theory explanation is not simpler than the non-conspiracy explanation in this case. It also makes claims that were not true, like that it claimed there were children being kept in the basement, but the place didn't have a basement. So it made claims that were empirically false. That's another reason to reject the theory. So the non-conspiracy explanation is simpler than the conspiracy explanation in this case. So the fact that something seems simpler because it explicitly appeals to only one cause doesn't mean it's actually simpler, because it might be kind of quietly appealing to other causes that you already accept for the non-conspiracy explanation. So it might just be adding a conspiracy on top of explanations that are already fine on their own without any conspiracy. Like the explanation there are kids at a pizza place because kids like pizza. So a good theory should also make predictions, right? So we want a theory that's simpler. We want a theory that provides a good, more thorough explanation than its alternatives. But we also want the theory to make predictions that can turn out to be true or false. That is an important way that we test theories. General relativity, for example, predicted that black holes exist and that there could be gravitational waves. Both of those predictions turned out to be true. We now have a photograph of a black hole, and we have measured gravitational waves. Both of those predictions turned out to be true. And that adds evidence for the theory. That provides good evidence that the theory is true, because it made predictions about what the world would have to be like for the theory to be true, and then those predictions came true. They turned out to be correct. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a prediction about what's going to happen in the future. It just has to be a prediction about what we will or could discover in the future. So general relativity predicted that black holes already exist and that gravitational waves already happen. And then we were later able to find and identify black holes and gravitational waves. And so the prediction came true, even though it's not really predicting the future per se. It's making predictions about what the world must be like already. So that's predictions the general relativity made that came true. The QAnon conspiracy theory kept making predictions about when, quote unquote, the hammer would drop, meaning that like Donald Trump would reveal everything and Democrats would be rounded up and executed in the streets. It also claimed that Donald Trump would serve a second term, and none of that came true. No one was executed in the street. Donald Trump didn't win a second term or didn't serve a second term. Martial law was never imposed. Like a lot of conspiracy or a lot of predictions that this conspiracy theory made turned out to be false. That's good evidence that the theory itself is false. Defenders of the conspiracy theory keep saying, okay, well, ignore that prediction. Here's the new prediction. But if it keeps making predictions that turn out to be false, that is really strong evidence that the theory is wrong. The theory is just incorrect. You need to keep track of the predictions the theory makes. And if the predictions turn out to be false, you need to remember that and take that as evidence that the theory is not true. So if the prediction did not come true, then that's evidence the theory is false. So in the QAnon case, the predictions did not come true. And that's strong evidence that the theory is not true. But in the general relativity case, the predictions did come true, and that's strong evidence that the theory is true. And so we want a theory to be more thorough than its rivals, simpler than its rivals, ideally, and we want it to make predictions that turn out to be true. And when we're given a conspiracy theory, we should be more skeptical for bigger conspiracy theories. The bigger the conspiracy is, the more skeptical we should be. So a lot of conspiracy theories, for the conspiracy to explain the data, it requires that journalists all be in on it across several different competing newspapers and TV news channels. It also, a lot of them also require that scientists and other experts are all also part of the conspiracy. And that means thousands of people involved in a secret conspiracy. And so the conspiracy theory has to appeal to motivations of some kind for every single person in the conspiracy. The conspiracy theory has to explain why people are participating in this conspiracy and keeping it secret. And that means it needs to explain motives and incentives for all of them, for thousands of people with different interests, different goals, different jobs. And it's often hard to do that. To say that there is a conspiracy in the news media, for example, requires that a bunch of newspapers that are competing against each other all work together and don't expose lies that the other one told. That's hard to believe. There's a strong incentive for any one newspaper to demonstrate that they got a story right and competing newspapers got the story wrong. So if they don't do that, you need to explain why. And I've never seen a good explanation from a conspiracy theory about why journalists across different news organizations would all work together on this secret. It doesn't make sense. It's something that you should be very skeptical of. There's a conspiracy theory, for example, that scientists are lying about climate change, right? The conspiracy theory that the scientific community is involved in a conspiracy to convince the public that climate change is happening when really climate change is not happening. The conspiracy theory says that basically tries to explain the scientific consensus that climate change is happening, not by appealing to climate change being real and scientists finding out that it's real, but instead by appealing to climate change being false and scientists being involved in a big conspiracy to lie about it and pretend that climate change is real. So that is a conspiracy theory. It tries to explain a piece of data, this consensus among scientists that climate change is real, and tries to explain it using a conspiracy. Scientists working in secret to deceive the public. The problem there is that there are lots and lots of scientists in the world, in many different countries, and most of them have no way to profit from the public believing in climate change. I mean, the only people I know of who are potentially profiting are like green energy companies and like electric vehicle companies, and even they don't really profit. Tesla's first ever profitable year was this past year. There's not a lot of money in climate change, or there's not a lot of money in people believing in climate change. There's a lot of money in people not believing in climate change because you can, keep using fossil fuels and other pollutants and whatnot. But there's not a lot of money in people believing in climate change. Electric vehicles and other sort of green companies are not profitable, have not been profitable. So scientists would all have to be partaking in this conspiracy for which they don't personally profit. And a scientist with tenure can't be fired. So you can't pressure them by threatening their job into going along with this conspiracy because they can't be fired. So you can't browbeat them into this conspiracy or participating in this conspiracy. And a scientist can make a big name for themselves and secure a lot of funding and whatnot by proving the scientific consensus false. Einstein is a name we have all heard of because Einstein proved that the scientific consensus about gravity was false. And that's why we've heard of him. A scientist can make a name for themselves and get a Nobel Prize and, everything that, might give some sort of incentive to them. They can get that by going against the scientific consensus and proving it false. So if there is a scientific consensus, individual scientists have no real incentive to go along with the consensus just because. and have every incentive to try to prove the consensus wrong. So if there is a consensus, say that climate change is real, that's really strong evidence that scientists individually believe it. And that's a good reason to think that there is strong scientific evidence for whatever the consensus says, such as that general relativity is real, or that evolution is real, or that climate change is real. That's the best explanation, the simplest, clearest, most thorough explanation for why this scientific consensus exists around this theory. It's that the theory is true and is supported by lots of good evidence. So the conspiracy theory that scientists are engaged in a conspiracy to deceive the public into believing in climate change when there is no climate change. The conspiracy theory can't really explain why almost all scientists would participate in this conspiracy. The incentives for scientists would push them to expose the conspiracy, not to believe the conspiracy. And so this sort of big, complex conspiracy among lots of different people should be very difficult for us to believe once we actually think through the details of it. Because what it's proposing is that thousands and thousands of people are working together in secret for no clear motive. None at all. No personal benefit. And a strong incentive to go against it. And that's a bad theory. That's implausible. That's very unlikely to be true. So we should be very skeptical of it. And we should probably conclude that it must be false. So why do people believe conspiracy theories in the first place? Well, one reason is that conspiracy theories often tell us to follow the breadcrumbs and look for clues and think for ourselves and to distrust experts. And that can make us feel like we're being smart and independent thinkers, that we're not, one of those idiots just believing whatever they're told. We're thinking for ourselves. Even though really what's happening is that, by doing that, we're being deceived and blindly listening to random people on the internet. Instead of blindly listening to experts who dedicated their lives to finding evidence, you're blindly listening to random people on the internet with no evidence. And that is worse. If you're going to blindly listen to someone, make it someone who's dedicated their lives to trying not to be wrong about the topic. That seems safer. Conspiracy theories also offer simple explanations for a complex world. The world is very complicated, but you don't have to, if the conspiracy theory is true, then you don't have to understand all the difficult economic and political and environmental factors at play. It's just a secret group of evildoers. That's it. That's all. Any idiot can understand a secret group of evildoers. We've all seen Disney movies and stuff. A small group of villains causing problems. Very simple, very clear. So you can understand what's happening in the world and why it's happening without having to understand economics or politics or environmental science or any of these very complicated topics that even professionals in the field don't understand all of. No economist is an expert in macroeconomics and microeconomics and behavioral economics and like every branch of economics. That just doesn't work. It's too broad for one person to understand it all. And a conspiracy theory reassures you, you don't have to understand it all in order to understand why things are happening. All you have to know is a small group of people are doing evil things because they're evil. That's it. So it offers a simple explanation for a complex world. Maybe not a simple explanation, because we talked about like the Pizzagate thing, where it's actually not as simple as it seems. It's adding causes, not minimizing them. But it's simple in the sense that it's easy to understand. You don't have to worry about a huge complex web of causes and different factors that are all relevant in different ways that are hard to figure out. You just have to understand the small group of evildoers. But of course, in reality, the world is complex, and there are a huge number of different factors that all play different roles and affect things in different ways. And it just is really hard to understand. The world is complicated and hard to understand. That's just life. That's it. So conspiracy theories promise to take that away, take the difficult complexities out of the picture, even though that's actually a common reason why they're wrong. The world is just more complex than conspiracy theories allow for. Conspiracy theories also offer clear villains to oppose. There are no moral gray areas. It's a simple solution to a complex problem. The world will be better if we can just defeat this one evil group. It gives a clear villain and a simple solution. Just beat this group and then the world will be better. Instead of all the myriad little changes we would have to make to our day-to-day lives and our society and all sorts of other things in order to solve the complex problems that we face in the world. Simple solution feels more appealing. It's easier to understand. It's sort of preferable in some ways, even though really the problems we face in the world are complicated and simple solutions aren't going to work. Probably. We need complicated, difficult solutions for complicated, difficult problems. There also just might be something reassuring about conspiracy theories because they kind of imply that people can very effectively execute plans and be in control of what happens at all times. And anyone who's watched politics knows that's not actually true. People in charge are way less effective and less successful at executing their plans than conspiracy theories would have us believe. And so conspiracy theories, you get to pretend that like, yeah, humans are in control of the world when really we're not. And that's kind of depressing to think about. And a conspiracy theory promises not to make you think about that. But we should think about that because it's true. So conspiracy theories have certain appealing features, maybe, but the vast majority of them are false. Some are true, like the Watergate conspiracy theory, but most are false. So what should we do? Well, we should approach conspiracy theories and other theories as potential explanations for facts, as a potential explanation for the facts. And we should compare that theory's merits to its rivals. Is it a simpler theory? Is there evidence for the claims the theory makes? Does the theory provide a more thorough explanation of the facts than its alternatives? Are all of the alleged motives of the alleged participants clear? If the theory were true, what evidence would we expect to have? If the theory involves thousands of people working together in secret, we should expect a couple of them to come forward and admit it. If no one does, that's evidence that the conspiracy is not real. We should also look to the predictions that the theory makes. If the theory makes predictions and they don't come true, that's a reason to stop believing the theory. If the theory makes predictions and they do come true, that's good evidence that the theory might be true. Also, bigger conspiracies are rarely successful and rarely secret for long. So smaller conspiracies explaining a more limited set of data should be more plausible. You know, if you want to explain a surprise birthday party appealing to a small conspiracy of your friends planning this party as a surprise in secret, is probably a good explanation for the surprise party. Thousands of people working together to fake a moon landing, not as good an explanation. Smaller conspiracies, more specific sets of data, probably more plausible. A theory should also have good reason for challenging the judgments of experts. An expert, by definition, is someone who knows a lot about a topic and who has dedicated years and years of their lives to trying hard to find and understand the truth about the topic. So if your theory demands that you distrust experts and doubt experts' judgments, that's a red flag for the theory, unless the theory can provide good reason for doubting the experts. Experts should generally be assumed to know what they're talking about. They're not always right. I mean, an individual doctor can be wrong about some things. The medical community makes new discoveries every day. New information comes out all the time. A doctor has never done learning. It is possible for your specific doctor to be incorrect. But if you think all doctors are mistaken, say like the anti-vaxxer thing, the conspiracy that the entire medical community is involved in poisoning children on purpose with vaccines for, I don't know, profit somehow, that's a bad theory. It assumes that everyone who studies medicine is involved in a conspiracy. And the only evidence for that conspiracy is one study that was later retracted after the author of the study admitted to falsifying data. So there's not a lot of good evidence for that theory. And so that theory is not a good reason, or doesn't provide a good reason to distrust experts, medical experts as a group. And the medical experts as a group say vaccines are safe. So if the theory says to distrust experts, it needs to give a really good reason for doing so. All right. So that's all I want to talk about for conspiracy theories. We should be very careful about what theories we believe, what theories we don't believe. And when presented with a theory, we should compare it to its alternatives and really think carefully about what kind of explanation it provides for the data and how many loose ends it's creating, like unexplained motives for behaviors and participation in the conspiracy and things. We should really look carefully and think carefully about all that kind of stuff. And we should only distrust experts when we have a good reason to. All right, so that's it. So I'm going to stop this video here. And in the next video, we will talk about epistemic injustice.